Absolute Flash shows how fast he is. So we are picking up with Absolute Flash. And this basically opens up in the aftermath of the last video that we covered. It's been a little while. The long and short of it is that Wally West got his powers while Barry Allen was experimenting basically with super speed. We don't really know if it ties into the Speed Force in the traditional sense, but what matters is that seemingly Wally got powers and Barry died. We didn't initially know how it all unfolded, but this is how we find out. So what goes on here is that Wally is being hunted down basically by the rogues, right? Glider, which is actually Golden Glider, but just a reworking of the character. You've got Captain Cold, you've got Digger Harkness, you've got the kind of characters that you're traditionally familiar with when it comes to Flash villainy. But Wally is completely and totally uncertain of what's going on, because not only is he dealing with just teenage angst, young people trying to figure out their place in the world and, trying to find some measure of independence while still longing for the safety of home, but now he also has to contend with all these newfound powers. And so what ends up going on is that when the rogues make their move, initially Glider tries to subdue him, and Wally immediately races faster, so fast that she can't even keep up with what's going on. She can't see what's happening. And so right off the bat, I would say this version of Wally is probably not as fast as his main DC Universe counterpart, but he is exceedingly fast, faster than the human eye could possibly catch, and most likely faster than that, because keep in mind, he's still learning about his powers, and he's still figuring out what he's capable of. Now, of course, Captain Cold, realizing that Wally's abilities are based on speed, just freezes the ground under him. It leads to Wally slipping, and then it leads to Wally's foot getting frozen, and so ultimately the rogues seem to get the upper hand until Wally lets off this massive burst of energy. Now, it's not like the infinite mass punch. Fingers crossed, we actually get that. That would be incredible. But at that moment, it jumps back to when he initially got his powers and the experiment by Barry Allen. Now, there is a very important thing to know here. The Absolute Flash comics are really the first time that we're actually seeing DC mention other parts of the Absolute universe. Specifically, in issue number 4, there's a reference to the Lazarus Corp. Now, of course, a lot of you guys already know Lazarus from Absolute Superman, and so this basically means Wally's in the same universe. So it's very, very likely here in this situation that what Barry has been doing is working on a project for the US government that would allow them to create someone comparable to Superman, or at the very least, just create super-powered beings. And so what ends up happening is that when Wally had just kind of walked in on this experiment with no idea what he was doing and was just caught up in all these energies, of course, they bombard him. Barry Allen, being protected from those energies, ends up reaching out for Wally. And when that happens, the father of Wally comes walking in the midst of all of this. And he asks the question, "Allen, what did you do?" And the response of Barry, "I swear, I didn't know that he was here." But again, Rudy just kind of freaks out because the idea is that his son is basically injured, gone, or in some capacity disappeared from all of existence. And so Rudy is just totally freaking out. Not only that, one of the other things to keep in mind is that at the beginning of this, that Barry Allen had a very laissez-faire attitude when it came to the various rules and regulations that had been put in place, particularly with regards to Rudy, the Colonel kind of overseeing all of this stuff, that because Wally was just so young, he was a teenager, he was naturally defiant, that kind of a thing, that the reality is that he knew his son would just wander off and probably defy the rules. Barry was supposed to be a way to keep that in check, in the sense that because of the dangerous nature of the experiment that Barry was working with, Wally wasn't supposed to know about it. Barry kind of tipped him off to it, and then Wally ended up wandering back in when he and Barry had become friends, and that's how all this happened. But Barry kind of points up in the air to where Wally's at, and Wally is basically a being of seemingly pure energy. Now again, we don't know exactly how all this ties together. That the Speed Force within the DC universe is a multiversal force, right? It literally stretches and permeates across the whole multiverse. We learned that from Grant Morrison's multiverse map, but we don't necessarily know if the Absolute universe fits into all of that, and if it does, how it fits into all of that. So again, we're kind of learning these things as we go on. And so what ends up happening is Wally kind of talks about what's happening, right? He sort of lashes out, he's confused, he's scared, he doesn't know what's going on, that he and Barry are basically anchored to each other, that when Barry touches him, that literally the two of them seemingly connect, and that when that happens, Wally kind of jumps back to the modern moment, right? What's happening in the here and now. That's something that we'll pick back up to here in a minute, because we actually end up getting this kind of idea that he's actually bouncing back and forth between points in time. But again, for the most part, the rogues seemingly get the upper hand on Wally, and then in turn, Wally phases out of captivity and immediately races off. So again, Wally doesn't fully understand his powers, the rogues don't understand his powers, and even in that moment when Glider finally catches up to him, he realizes she's there and just races off even faster. So his speed is just increasing constantly. He's learning how to use his speed as he uses his speed. It's pretty awesome. It's pretty fantastic. And that's why he kind of gives us this depiction. He says, I am here. I know that. I am here in the desert and it is now. But I am also back in Barry's lab. I am with my dad. I am here, but I'm also 3 years old and my dad is on leave and he took us to Wonder Island and it's the best day ever. My mom is there too. She's still alive and we're all together. I'm all together. I'm still whole in one piece, not broken, not here and there, and I can't stop running. No matter how much I want to, I cannot stop and I'm scared. Then suddenly it happens. I'm not here and I'm not back then. I am forward and I see what's coming. I see tomorrow. No, 2 tomorrows, 2 worlds. Am I a hero or am I a monster? Now, at the outset, when he's kind of having these flashbacks, it's very easy to pull out this idea that he's just kind of remembering, right? He's like, I remember when I was younger and I remember this, but no. This tells us he's traveling the time stream. He's literally running the time stream. Now, we don't know if he's actually running through the time stream per se, or if this is his mind experiencing all these moments in time simultaneously, a kind of Dr. Manhattan type thing. But once he gets this glimpse of 2 possible futures of this world, one where he saves it, one where he destroys it, he snaps back to reality and he asks, what is happening to me? What am I becoming? And so Captain Cold, realizing they're kind of in over their head, ends up unleashing what he calls the freak show, which turns out to be Grodd, who's this little adorable ape. He's not the great big huge Grodd that you're used to with like just these incredible, telepathic powers. But he is still cool within this story, because what we do is we jump back again to that moment when Wally was with Barry and they were connected. And he says, moments of connection. I have just connected with Barry. I have just killed Barry. I am scared. There is only one thing I can think to do. I run. I run out of the lab, out of Fort Fox, and I don't want to look back. I can feel something there, chasing me. Not something, but someone. Barry dies in slow, agonizing motion, dragged behind me. Flesh peels off his bones, and no matter how fast I run, he stays with me, tethered, connected, until finally Wally gets to the cave where we initially picked up, where he was in the desert. And you just have Barry standing there with his hand out, literally his body just completely falling apart. And he just says, help me, and then ultimately collapses, and then Barry dies. And so in that moment, Wally, just running as fast as he possibly can, ends up coming across a farm. And that is when Grodd finally catches up to him. Now, the idea here is that Grodd is a kind of hound of sorts, right? Grodd goes after the people that he's tasked with going after, uses his telepathy, and then basically takes them out. One of the other cool things here is we get a reference to Thawne. Now, it is not Eobard Thawne. It's actually Eleanor Thawne. So again, kind of a reworked version, presumably, of Eobard, but at this point, we're only 3 or 4 issues in. Far too early to tell. But Grodd ends up catching up to Wally. And when he does, Wally's kind of curious, right? And so when the two of them encounter each other, because Wally recognizes him from the lab, their fingers touch. And when they do, there's a telepathic connection. And they both realize they have a lot in common, right? The reality here is they both feel lost. They both feel like they don't necessarily have a sense of purpose. The life they knew before has been destroyed. But more so than any of that, they both struggle with regret. And so with this kind of common ground, these moments of connection, with Grodd seeing and experiencing the losses of Wally West, his mother dying, right, losing those very personal connections that he had, the pain that came with it, that again, you kind of have Grodd experiencing his own form of loss, being pulled away from his mother, being experimented on. Wally sees Grodd's experience, Grodd sees Wally's experience, and that common connection unifies them. And that's where Grodd says Wally, and Wally says Grodd. And so the two of them start talking, right? Wally, Grodd, same. And Wally just says, I'm scared, Grodd, and I don't know what to do. But Grodd says, Wally, no scared. Wally and Grodd are the same. But that's when the rogues finally catch up to them. And in that moment, Grodd actually turns against the rogues, the very people that turned him into what he was, and initially teams up with Barry. And he says, I have to run, I have to go, I've messed everything up. Now, that's kind of the young, angsty part of Wally coming into play, right? For a lot of younger people out there, any one particular experience they have, it's kind of the newness of it all, right? Especially if it's a brand new experience, it's the whole world. There is nothing outside of that experience. So it's very easy to take these small little moments and chalk them up to being these huge, grandiose deals, right? Your first heartbreak is the biggest heartbreak ever in the history of the world, and you're never going to get past it. For Wally, it's much the same way, that Wally's having these small little moments, and in turn, they're huge deals to him, because all these small things are happening, but they're things that he can't fully understand. He doesn't know what he's experiencing, but that's where Grodd comes in. Grodd touches him and says, Wally, no scared. Wally and Grodd, Grodd and Wally. And so Grodd turns against the rogues, and at that point just kind of emits this telepathic attack on everybody, and that's where Captain Cold's like, the monkey's gone rogue, which I feel has some meme potential in some capacity. I don't know exactly how you would make that work, but it's got to exist somehow. And so the rogues basically go on the attack again. But again, Wally, kind of bringing Grodd along for the ride, also ends up going against the rogues. And he says, I can't run, not anymore. So I stop. For once, I face it all head on. This guy does not stand a chance. And that's when Wally is building up his confidence, right? Wally's realizing what he's capable of, that with him and Grodd together, they can achieve incredible things. And so what Wally ends up doing is going back to the cave. And he says, any life I knew is gone. And I know now that I cannot go back. This is my life now, and I can't outrun it. I just need to be here now. And in realizing that, a calm comes over me, and I feel something that I have not felt in a long time. I start to feel free, because at that moment, he puts on the Flash's suit, Barry Allen's suit, and just races off. And so following that, you kind of pick up in the aftermath of all of this, right? Where Wally continues on and he says, sometimes the same thoughts repeat in my head over and over and over again until I cannot take it anymore. And I'd rather feel nothing at all than to feel like this for 1 second longer. But my mom taught me some tricks to help stop my mind from racing. The first 5 things you can see, then 5 things you can touch, then 5 things you can hear. It's supposed to pull you out of your thoughts and ground you in the moment. So here goes. 5 things I can see. I see my mother's gravestone. Rain is hitting it. I see my father in his military dress, trying not to cry, trying to be strong because he thinks that's what I need him to be. I see the priest as he reads words meant to comfort me, but his words mean nothing. They just sound empty and old and pointless. I see the hole in the ground where my mother has gone, where she will stay forever. And he says, this moment, I need to look. I need to see, even though I already know what's down there with mom, down there in the darkness. And it is basically Barry, right? This kind of haunted memory that Wally is experiencing. He basically has what we would call PTSD, right? That's really what he's struggling with, not even taking into account things like anxiety and so on. And then he wakes up, right? The whole thing was a dream. And that's where he kind of tells Grodd that he's okay, and the two of them go on the move again. And so he ultimately ends up in Central City. But one of the cool things about this is he says, since the desert, since I met Grodd, my thoughts have been surprisingly calm. My mind's been sort of still for maybe the longest stretch that I can remember. Maybe whatever happened to me in Barry's lab is finally finally wearing off. All I know for sure is that I'm hungry, like hungrier than I ever remember being. This is actually a great throwback to the Mike Baron run on Wally West. A lot of you guys may not know that. After Crisis on Infinite Earths, Mike Baron was the one who started writing Flash before Mark Waid came on. And one of the things that he would focus on is kind of the crisis of confidence of Wally. Can he ever really live up to being the superhero that Barry Allen was, that kind of thing. But also his insane metabolism, right? It was nuts, right? The way that was done was hilarious, smashing down cheeseburgers like a madman. But then suddenly Wally is met by an older man, right? Where he asks how old he is. And the response of Wally, like, I mean, what's the deal to you? And this guy's, look, man, I mean, I'm not trying to be creepy or anything. It's just, if you're under 18, we run a youth mission just a block down the road. So there's a hot meal and a bed waiting for you. If you ever want to come out there, you can stay up for a week at a time. And this girl kind of walks by and is like, I mean, you know, like, the place is legit if you can stand all of Ralph's terrible dad jokes. And then, of course, Ralph thanks her and calls her Linda. So this is Linda in the Absolute Universe. The question to ask here is, are Wally and Linda going to end up together? I don't know, but I hope so. They have to. They have to, right? I mean, all you guys who are Wally fans, you guys know, I know, they have to end up together. But of course, what we also find out is this guy, Ralph, is not just any random guy. He gives a card to Wally, and it's the Dibney mission. A lot of you guys who don't know who Ralph Dibney is, kind of a fun bit of history here. Ralph Dibney was created by John Broome and Carmine Infantino back in 1960 when they didn't realize DC already had the rights to Plastic Man when DC acquired Quality Comics. And so Ralph Dibney is a elongated man. He's like Reed Richards before Reed Richards, and that he's been a long-standing member of the superhero community. Although, bless his poor wife's soul, man, what happened to her in Identity Crisis, that was pretty messed up. But outside of that, right, outside of Sue Dibney, that this is one of these things where they're kind of bringing in familiar characters, but they're playing starkly different roles. There's nothing here to indicate that Ralph Dibney can stretch around or anything along those lines, but he is still basically being a good guy, right? Still being a kind of hero of sorts, even if it's not a traditional superhero. And so this picks up with a conversation between Linda and Wally. It also shows Wally basically feeding a piece of food to Grodd, which, why wouldn't you? But the two of them kind of have a bit of a conversation here, but not a lot of information is divulged, right? They kind of bust each other's balls about their names and things like that, just kind of breaking the ice, right? Very simple, basic conversation and getting a feel for each other, right? Just the nature of human conversation as it exists now. And so one of these things is that they both kind of reveal they're each running from something. Now, Wally doesn't necessarily go into detail about the powers that he has and what he's capable of and the whole thing with Barry. It's simply just the two of them saying they're trying to escape their own history, right? They're trying to run away from their own past in some way. Now, we don't really know the story of Linda, but the fact is, she says, we're all running from something. But for what it's worth, this place is okay, right? Ralph and Sue are actually pretty cool. They're good people who are doing good things. But again, that's why he asked the question, what are you running from? And she doesn't say anything at all. And so ultimately, it's just kind of like, okay, well, you know, I guess if we don't really have anything to talk about next, Linda gives him the rest of her food because she realized how fast he scarfed his down, and then the two of them kind of part ways. But following that, Wally ends up meeting with Ralph. And Ralph basically tells him, look, you know, here's the thing. There's only 3 rules that you have to go by here. No drugs, no fights, and we ask that everybody take a shift helping with the cleaning and the cooking. And that's really it, right? You can talk to my better half, Sue, to, you know, figure out the schedule and everything, but it's just kind of like, call me Ralph, right? Welcome to this place, and hopefully you feel good here, right? Like, hopefully you enjoy your time here. But remember, you only have about a week. But then Wally realizes Grodd's taken off. So at that point, Wally starts following him, and then you switch over to Rudy. Now, what's so wild about this is that he didn't actually know what was being done here. He didn't actually know what work was being performed here. And he says that, right? Like, Thawne shows up and she's like, you know, what are you doing here? And he's like, that's not the question, Dr. Thawne. The question is, what was Barry Allen doing here? What was the focus of his work? And again, that's where she says, we have a contract with Lazarus Corp. Dr. Allen was the point man on our augmented weapons program. You know that. And he says, I know what the mission briefs said, Eleanor, but what I want to know is what he was really doing. All this tech that you two have developed here, the weapons the rogues use, where's it all coming from? And the response of Eleanor, I do believe your mission is to provide security for our work, not to question it, right? So keep your mouth shut. But what's also kind of wonky about this is that in this conversation, she doesn't really see Wally as a 15-year-old kid. She sees Wally as an asset, as a kind of weapon to be used. Now, of course, as you would expect from Wally's dad, he sees his son as his son, right? He's not just some weapon to be sent out there and used by the government for their own ends. But again, Eleanor is very hardcore here, very cold and cut straight to the point, right? Your son may be the greatest success that we've ever had. He's our ultimate weapon as we see him. And the response of his dad, he's not your weapon. I need to get him back here safely and undo whatever it is that Alan did to him. And that's where Eleanor says, we know where he is. We are tracking Grodd. And that's where he's just kind of like, then like, I can take my team to get him. But the response of her is, you don't really understand the full extent of what we're dealing with here. Your son was not the only thing that escaped the night of the accident. There were other projects. Some of our more volatile experiments are still in the wild. So these are things like Project Firestorm, right? Ronnie Raymond, Weather Wizard, Project Heatwave. And she says, the ape is leading your son right to them. And so when you switch back over to Wally, who's following Grodd, Grodd's kind of leading him sort of down this tunnel. And he says, Wally and Grodd stop hot. And where Wally asks, what are you doing? Right? Like, Grodd, answer me. The response of Grodd, hot. And he just kind of points, right? And he's like, I don't understand, right? Wally's like, I don't understand what you're talking about. And Grodd just says, hot. Hot is here. And he points him in the direction of Heatwave, which I am really excited to see because this dude looks wild. Like, I am so excited about this. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching. I will catch you all later. Peace.